How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
Scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
This culture breeds this competitiveness, right? Which is then both good and bad. And so, what was some of the signs you saw of ineffectiveness that this was resulting in?
Well, one was just looking around and seeing who was getting advancement. Now, one thing I did and do continue, because I have many friends at Microsoft, coach many people there, is the element of meritocracy. And we can argue whether it's even possible to have a meritocracy, but it was a conversation. It was about what's the difference you're making, so impact, and how are you making the impact? Yeah. And so that was sort of a big theme, okay? And something that was a driving force. But, you know, for me, what I saw was, as I was putting in more effort and studying and trying to build connections and do all the things I thought I had to do, that wasn't necessarily getting me advanced. In fact, I sort of looked around, I was doing work that people 3 or 4 levels above me were doing, and yet I was like making 1/10 of the income, and I'd look and see peers getting promoted and wonder, how did that happen? And it led me to sort of really question how I was about to get ahead. And so that led me to find different ways. Now, the first thing I fell back in love with was my own self-management, you know, understanding that, look, if I wanted to make it and have a good life, I need to start looking at how I am showing up as a human being here and building from the inside out. And that led me to take a lot of my background and upbringing in the Eastern tradition, in the yoga tradition that I had been exposed to as a child and studied as a teenager along with my parents, but discarded, thinking that's good when I'm old and gray, but I want to succeed. And so I compartmentalized all that and said, okay, at a later date, you know, and bringing more of that in, it led me to get heavily involved in yoga, both a physical practice and a breathing practice. It led me to rediscover a meditation practice that served me well as a kid, but then I just sort of like let go because I didn't have time for it. It led me to work more on myself and to dive more into yoga philosophy, Eastern tradition, and some of the work there to get just a knowledge-based understanding of things. And that was in this period about 20 years ago, from 2000 to 2003, 4, 5, 6. And I started building myself up from within, and still at that point caring a heck of a lot about outcomes, okay? A lot. So during that era. But I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere without my inner self coming online. And so that was a path that continued to deepen, eventually led to me being a certified yoga teacher and teaching while I worked this busy job.
Amazing.
Actually optimizing my life around it, where I moved upstairs from a yoga studio just so I could manage my team, do this crazy job, and teach my classes, and just I got rid of everything that was distracting, and including my commute, so I could walk downstairs barefoot, practice, teach, and then roll into work. So for me, the key was understanding the self-management, and then seeing how that would help me achieve goals. And it did. For a while it did. It helped me bring more of myself to the table. But I was still very outcome driven and status driven still.
Before you started seeing the results of that, you talk about this practice as a study, as a practice, almost like a separate project in your life that you were working on over and above your work. But before you started seeing the results of that, how did you stay motivated to keep doing it and working at this inner self?
Well, I'll use language I know now as a coach, because that's all I can do, because we're talking now. I don't want to make it sound like I was like philosophical or wise.
And podcasts can have that effect sometimes, but we're all figuring it out.
I want to, but I have language now I didn't know then. Back then it felt good. It was interesting. I would say things like, oh, my friends are at the yoga studio, or, oh, I'll look good this way, or, oh, I have literal pain in my neck from spending 16 hours a day hunched over a laptop.
Yeah.
I literally looked like I was like Gollum. I
Yep.
mean, I was just like, and
Can
no
relate to
joke,
that.
after, so there was physical pain.
Yeah.
There was also, there were cool people and cute girls in the yoga class. I mean, it was just, there was all this stuff
Complete
there,
package.
but I'll tell you, it made a fundamental difference. And there's nothing like having a direct experience of something to take it from being a habit that takes willpower to build,
Yeah.
or something I need to suffer through, to something where there's intrinsic motivation. And I'll tell you, I used to have people, I did stop teaching eventually back in 2013, 12, 13. I had gotten married and I still practiced. But people would say, oh, how are you able to practice all the time? And I was teaching 3 classes a week, and I was traveling, and I was running a team and all this stuff. How are you able to like manage your time and make it happen and have the energy? And I would just sort of look cross-eyed at them, because yes, it took energy, but there was something else. I wasn't trying to muster energy. Sometimes, I would like peace out of a meeting at 4:30 because I would teach 3 hours of classes on Monday nights.
Wow.
Sometimes that would feel like I was running a marathon, so I'd have to manage my energy, but there was a different driver. I mean, it would light me up. And I'd say there's to specifically answer the question, I was more in love with the learning curve and the people and this never ending growth curve of, teaching this sequence of 56 postures. But I would have professional athletes, Seattle Seahawks, show up because it was Bellevue. I'd have, I don't know, some people I learned were billionaires show up because it's near Medina, where like Bezos and Gates have houses and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd have students come in from the community college. I'd have, I had a lady come in who had back surgery, and she was a regular to the classes. So there's this infinite need to be very connected to the experience and the people, and infinite challenge, in teaching even the most simple of postures. And there was this fascination with it. Now, after a time, I was fascinated by other things, and eventually I decided to stop teaching and do other things. But for me personally, there is the connection to a learning curve that can change the game. And at the time, it was sort of an unconscious learning curve where I wanted to learn. Now, as a coach, I understand that if we can make that conscious, where we want to grow, develop, and learn, also as a leader, you better be able to understand, where do each of your team members light up, come alive when they're learning? And how can that be a conscious understanding, not just something that is happening under the scene?
Yeah.
So for me, that's what shifted it. And to this day, I try to be very aware. I became a triathlete and an ultramarathon runner, all this stuff. Whenever it became a grind, it meant something in me was treating this as a habit, not as a practice, but as a thing to do.
Yeah.
And I lose touch with the learning. And if I can't find that connection to the learning, I really should ask, why am I doing this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the game changer.
That's such a good point, because if you are in love with the process and in love with the learning, no one can compete with you, right? Because you're going to keep doing it. You're going to keep getting better at it. You're going to keep producing results, even though it's not the results that are driving you. Right.
And it's a very intrinsic thing. Even people will hear this and say, okay, this is a practice. Okay, this is a hack. What do I want to learn? Let me come up with 3. Doesn't quite work. It's something to spot and witness and then just look for and see, versus like this thing to do, because it can help me get ahead.
These 100%. So it didn't feel like work to you doing the yoga practice, teaching